Genesis chapter 41 tonight. So we left off with the butler forgetting all about Joseph once he was restored to his butlership. And Joseph is just sort of in limbo, just waiting. I'm sure he got his hopes up when, that dream came through and Joseph was able to give that encouraging dream to the butler, that the butler was going to be restored. And then there was that hope that once the butler got back in there into the presence of Pharaoh, that butler could put in a good word for Joseph. Surely he would. After the grief of mind that Joseph spared the butler who was suffering from a nightmare. Well, he thought it was a nightmare. Come to find out it was a good interpretation. It was a good dream. But when the butler is restored to his position in the kingdom of Egypt, he forgets all about Joseph, and that's where we left off in the last verse of Genesis chapter 40. He's in the dark. He's in a dark, dank prison, just waiting, still trying to figure it all out. And I know we talked about it a little bit, but I think it's really important that once again we put ourselves in Joseph's position. If you were him, wouldn't you be wondering, Lord, where are you? What are you doing? What is your plan? I'm trying to trust you. Help me out, Lord. Throw me a bone. Give me something that encourages my faith. Right now, things are dark. Things are looking bad. Lord, I've been committed. I've been faithful. Don't we do that all the time? Lord, haven't I been committed? Haven't I been faithful? That's probably not the best argument to give to the Lord, because he could probably poke holes in your theory. Well, as a matter of fact, Arlyn, not always. You've not always been committed. You've not always been faithful. But we do get the feeling like that. I'm sure Joseph was at least struggling with that a little bit. Lord, I've been just right in tune with you all the way. And just when it seems like something good is starting to break out, the progress is starting to happen, I'm right back to square one or worse even. But just remember this, in just one moment of time, one flash, everything can change. The Lord doesn't need much time. When he finally releases that blessing or gives that promise or fulfills that need or answers that prayer, it doesn't take him long. It's a flash, it's a moment. So maybe you've been, waiting for 5 years or 20 years. Just remember, everything can change in the blink of an eye. If you don't know it by now, this is just God's way. Preparation. Boom, finally the blessing. Have you figured that out? It's true. And when he unleashes that blessing, maybe it has to do with all the waiting and all the patience, but when he unleashes that blessing in your life, it makes your head spin and your heart pound. It's good when it happens. So that's how it's going to happen for Joseph in this chapter. A lot of waiting, a lot of questions, a lot of just seeming lack of progress. But in just a moment of time, the Lord is going to flip the script. He's going to show all the pieces in place. He's going to pull Joseph up into that position that he wants him to be in. So you stay there too. You just hang in there. I know people hate that advice, but it's good biblical advice. You just hang in there. You keep putting your trust in the Lord. When it gets difficult, you keep working on that. Keep trusting, keep plugging away. Here's the thing, the Lord is going to come through. And the worst thing you can do is be a malcontent when he shows up and delivers on the blessing. That's the worst thing you can do. Be there with your hands folded and your brow furrowed, and then the Lord shows up and unleashes the blessing, and there you are as a malcontent. Oh, I should have handled that differently. Lord, I should have trusted you. I should have smiled through some of that suffering. So you stay the course, and let's study how Joseph came through and how God came through for Joseph. So let's look at verse 1, Genesis chapter 41. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. Now stop right there for just a moment, because you remember where we left off. Genesis 40 concluded with the butler being restored to his butlership. Really good word. I like that. I still like that word. Still impressed with that word. We left off with the butler being restored to his butlership and forgetting all about Joseph. So what verse 1 means is this, Ever since the butler was restored to that position, it's been 2 years, and the butler has yet to bring up Joseph's name to the Pharaoh. But as we said last week, even when people forget, even when people fail us, even when people let us down, the Lord has a way of pushing his will through, doesn't he? He has a way of getting a hold of the strings and pulling the strings that he needs to get you into the place that he wants you to be. So that's exactly what's going to take place here. If you're wondering why Joseph's great God would allow Joseph to experience such a long wait, look, this is a really easy answer. The answer is this: God was working on two things while Joseph was waiting. Number one, he was working on the man, and number two, he was working on the land. He was preparing the man, Joseph, for the position, and he was preparing the land, Egypt, for the man. See, he was working on two different things. Joseph's not free from prison because, first off, the Lord doesn't just want him free from prison. The Lord wants him free from prison and in a very prominent position in Egypt. So to get that done, he's got to do some preparation work. First, the man, Joseph. You might wonder, what kind of preparation does he need? Well, I think when we look at his character, it's tough to think that Joseph needed any work on his character, any work on his morals whatsoever. He just seems kind of perfect. We know he's not, but I don't really necessarily think that's what the Lord was sculpting in Joseph, was the character work. But I do think there was some stuff to be sculpting in the life of Joseph. If you've watched the life of Joseph very carefully, you've noticed something. His mommy and daddy really kind of pampered him a little bit. You know, what do they call that? Being born with a silver spoon in your mouth. He was born pretty much into a prominent position within the family. He was the favorite. And so right away at a very young age, he got the supervisor's coat, remember? He got the foreman's jacket, the coat of many colors. And really all Joseph has known in his life is standing out and watching people work, reporting to dad if they're doing a good job, reporting to dad if they're doing a bad job. Pretty much all he's ever done is supervise. And so I think if there's something the Lord wants to work on in Jacob's life, I think it would probably be this: work ethic. He wants to make this man, Joseph, a worker. You say, well, Arlyn, that's a stretch. How do you get at that? Well, look at the position that the Lord had him in as the Lord is preparing him for the position he wants him in. He's had him doing what the whole time? Working. First, as a servant in a household. Secondly, as a prisoner. But then as a prisoner, what did Genesis 40 tell us that he's doing? He's serving the prisoners. He's working. And see, that is an absolute must when it comes to doing anything productive for the Lord in God's economy. Number one, you have to be a servant. You have to know how to work. You have to know how to serve others. We've talked about it quite a bit in this fellowship. Jesus said, if you want to be the greatest, then you're going to have to be the servant of all. Because in his thinking, in his reckoning, the greatest among us is the one that serves the most. So this is part of Joseph's cultivation and preparation, I believe, is turning him into a servant. Folks, he's going to be serving the entire nation of Egypt under the Lord's direction. So he's going to have to know how to serve. As far as the preparation for the land of Egypt, well, you're going to see it in this chapter. There is a very small window where Joseph could possibly even think about becoming placed into the position that he's going to be placed in. A very small window. It had to happen at one specific time. God was going to have to get the Pharaoh into a position of need, therefore the entire land of Egypt into a position of need, before they're going to realize that God has someone wise in the land that can meet that need and help with that need. So that's the preparation of the land. Just know this tonight, if you've been waiting a long time for God to really get you where you know you're supposed to get, just accept this, that it's either that God is working on you, preparing you for the position or the appointment or the blessing, either that or he's preparing the behind the scenes stuff. He's preparing the position for you. It's one or the other, right? It's got to be. Either the position isn't ready for you. Tammy, I didn't have you in mind when I was preaching, when I was studying this, but your face just kind of popped up there. It's either that the position isn't ready for you or you're not ready for the position. So the best thing you can do, instead of being a malcontent, instead of being disgruntled with God, the best thing you can do is just make sure God's not waiting on you. Make sure you're preparing yourself. How do you do that? You know that. It's study. It's prayer. It's seeking. It's worship. You prepare yourself. You make sure you're not holding up the program of God in your life. You don't want God to have the position ready for you, just waiting on you. Because listen, He's not going to put somewhere where they don't belong. You got to be ready. So make sure you're doing your part. You know, this speaks very powerfully to me because I had a short stint in Alaska in 2001 and 2002. And at the end of 2002, as my belief system was really changing, the Lord was shaping me, I really felt the Lord's direction for me to move down to Gettysburg. Now, it seemed crazy because I really liked Gettysburg, and everyone would probably look at that and they would probably think, well, that's just where he wants to go. But I really believed the Lord wanted me to go down there, and I was just certain that when I got down to Gettysburg, I was going to plant a church, and in no time I'd be a full-time pastor, and, you know, man, it would just work out beautifully. But that is not how it happened. When I got down to Gettysburg, God put me exactly where He needed me for 8 hours a day so that He could speak to me for 8 hours a day and completely rework my belief system. I come to find out I was not there to step up into the position. I come to find out I was there for preparation. I needed a lot of preparation, and so I put myself to it. All right, Lord, this might take a year. I'm going to do it. I'm going to be prepared. Okay, Lord, maybe 2 years. All right, maybe way more. And it ended up being a lot more than that. But I stuck with it. I brought myself to that commitment where, Lord, once the position's ready for me, I want to be ready to go. So until you put me in the place you want me, I'm going to be working on me. I'm going to be building my character. I'm going to be building my morals. I'm going to be studying the Word. I'm going to be cultivating a life of prayer. I'm going to get this guy as ready as I can have him so that I'm not the one that's holding you up, Lord. And I would encourage you to do yourself and the Lord that favor too. You be working on you when you feel like you're in those holding patterns. Reading on. I don't think we're going to get this chapter done tonight. Reading on. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he stood by the river. Verse 2, suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows. By the way, this is not strange so far. This was a normal thing for cows to do there in Egypt. They would actually wade down into the shallow areas of the Nile River and they would eat the reeds. So this is pretty normal. These cows are down there in the Nile. They're eating the reeds. They come up out of the Nile, and the scripture says they were fine looking and fat. They were hefty heifers. Just the kind of cows you want to make burgers out of. Oh boy, I'm getting myself hungry. We're going to have to cut this study short. And it says they fed in the meadow. Verse 3, then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt. So they were down there in the Nile too. Well, we assume this is the Nile. I mean, it's Pharaoh. He's got to be dreaming about the Nile, right? But they obviously didn't eat too well like the first 7, did they? Because they come up looking, emaciated, thin, gaunt, and ugly, the scripture says. Maybe it looked like they had a touch of mad cow disease, like with eyes pointing in different directions. I was going to get a picture of that to put up here tonight, but I decided not to. It says they stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. Verse 4, and the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. And I guess that would wake you. You're having a nightmare about cannibalistic cows. Here's where the dream took a turn from reality and, hypothetically possible to to not possible. I don't think that's going to happen. Now, chickens, they are cannibalistic. I found that out when we went and got chickens for ourselves. I found that out that if you throw chicken meat into the, chicken run, they'll eat it. It's kind of twisted to me. But we got these cannibalistic cows that eat one another. The skinny cows eat up the fat cows. And verse 5 says, he slept. Now, just, have you ever had one of those dreams? You wake up, it's awful. You have a very disconcerting dream, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, I hope that's over. I hope when I fall back asleep, I don't like slip back into that dream mode and have that dream anymore. Well, that's exactly what happens to Pharaoh. He wakes up from this very strange dream, cannibalistic cows, and he slips right back into that same kind of dream mode. And the scripture says he dreamed a second time, and suddenly 7 heads of grain. Now it says corn in the King James Version. You just have to understand that doesn't mean corn. It means grain. This is wheat that we're talking about. So grains of wheat. It says it came up on one stalk, plump and good. Verse 6. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. So now it gets even weirder. It was cow eating cow, which, I guess is hypothetically possible. I mean, they could do it. Here's what's not possible. Wheat eating wheat. Wheat don't have mouths. Wheat doesn't eat anything. Wheat absorbs, but wheat doesn't eat anything. So, nonetheless, though, strange dream, but nonetheless, the same type of thing is happening in both dreams. We're seeing the lean eating up the fat. We're seeing the gaunt eating up the hefty. Verse 8, now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. And no wonder, because the Egyptian economy was built on 2 things. Cows, cattle, and grain. Yeah. So this is like the economy that Pharaoh is dreaming about and becoming concerned about. He knows that if this is bad, if it's a bad meaning, a bad interpretation, this could infect the entire land of Egypt. I mean, we're talking about affecting the meat eater, the burger eater, and the vegetarian. This hits everyone. Reading on, it says, he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh told them his dreams. But there was no one who can interpret them for Pharaoh. Now, at this time, the Egyptians, as you know, had many gods. One of the gods they had was named Thoth. T-H-O-T. No, I'm sorry. T-H-O-T-H. And Thoth was the god of fate to the Egyptians. And therefore, when you had a dream and you were looking for an interpretation, you went to the god of fate. You went to Thoth. And the thinking was that Thoth would be the revealer of the meanings of the dream. So whatever god from Egypt gave you the dream, you could go to Thoth and he would give you the interpretation. But on this case, Thoth has nothing to say. I'm not going to make any jokes about Thoth had no thoughts on that. He had nothing to say. None of the magicians or wise men could come up with an interpretation, which is puzzling to me. You think someone would make something up. I mean, if the Pharaoh got mad at you for not having an answer, he could kill you. You think you'd just come up with something. Say something like this. Here's the meaning of the dream, Pharaoh. It's a cow eat cow world, and that's no bull. Something like that. Come up with something, right? But they got nothing. Hold on to that thought for a minute. We're going to come back to that. They've got absolutely nothing. Verse 9 says this, then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh saying, oh man, I remember my faults today. I dropped the ball on something, Pharaoh. I messed up. I forgot about something important. Verse 10, when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, We each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now, there was a young Hebrew man with us there. That would be Joseph, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dream for us. To each man he had interpreted according to his own dream, and it came to pass, just as he interpreted to us, so it happened. He, that is the Pharaoh, restored me to my office, and he, the Pharaoh, hanged him, the baker. So he remembers, oh man, Joseph. You know, he told me to remember him when I was back into my position as a butler, as a cupbearer, and I forgot all about him. My fault, my bad. But now that you're talking about dreams and interpretations, that's jogged my memory. I just see that this is God. You know, this is God's stuff. God's working, God's setting stuff up. And the Lord puts this scenario right in front of the butler so that the butler can get that memory boost and remember, hey, Pharaoh, you're looking for someone to interpret a dream that you've had that's troubling you. I know a guy. It's not Noah, it's Joseph. I know a guy. He can interpret the dream. I've remembered him this day. Verse 15. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, no, that's not where we are. We're on verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, and he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. Now, that, of course, was because he had to. You know the Jews, and they believed in the long beards. Don't even cut the corners of your beards and the longer hair. So this wasn't a Jewish thing to do, but it was an Egyptian thing to do. You probably know this about the Egyptians, that for an Egyptian man, he was to be shaved, completely shaved. No hair on his head, looking something like this up here. No beard, no mustache, just clean shaven. That was the way of the Egyptian. And when you were in Egypt, well, you know, it's the same thing. They say, when in Pittsburgh, drive like a Pittsburgher. Well, when in Egypt, you look like an Egyptian. Walk like an Egyptian. You know, all that stuff. You blend in. You're going to see the Pharaoh, so get yourself a shave, get cleaned up. I mean, he probably didn't smell too great being a prisoner after all. They didn't really afford them those kind of luxuries, I wouldn't think. So he's shaven. He goes to see the Pharaoh, verse 15. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it through the grapevine. I mean, I've heard it said of you that you can understand a dream, to interpret it. Verse 16, so Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And again, as we mentioned last week, this shows humility and proper recognition. He doesn't take credit. He doesn't say this is his gifting. He doesn't say this is my milieu. This is my, genre of spirituality. No, he gives God all the credit. He says, and I wonder if Pharaoh's heart didn't just stop for a minute when he said, it's not in me. No can do, Pharaoh. I can't do this. I can't give you the interpretation. But then the continuation was this, but the Lord can. And Joseph says it's going to be an interpretation of peace. The Lord's going to give you a good answer, Pharaoh. So, just a question for you. How do you suppose that Joseph knew that? Did he know that? Was he just talking? Was he just saying this to say it? Was he hoping for a good one so as not to displease the Pharaoh? I think here's what it is, folks. He's already on to the scent of what the Lord is doing. He's already sniffing the scent like a bloodhound that gets a hold of the scent of a mountain lion. And he's not going to stop on that scent until that mountain lion is treed. Joseph's on the scent. He knows the Lord is moving. He knows the Lord has a peaceful message. And the Lord's just going to continue to use him to bring the interpretation out. Now, just an interesting note here. Back to an earlier thought. Why couldn't the Egyptian magicians or wise men, why couldn't their religious people interpret the dream? Here's why. This dream is from God, the one true God. They're used to dreams from their false gods. They're not used to dreams from Yahweh, the one true God. And that's why no one in the land, nothing connects. There's no interpretation. There's no thought. They're completely in the dark. Now, as you know, the Bible teaches that there are false gods. And it's accurate to say false gods. I don't think it's accurate to say fake gods. The Bible doesn't teach that there's fake made-up gods. The Bible recognizes that behind these false gods are demonic entities that are using those identities to deceive people and mislead people. So picture this, you've got demonic entities behind all of their gods. They think they are real gods. And there's some proof there, they think. These entities speak to them. These entities lead them. These entities will give them dreams, and then their God, Thoth, will interpret those dreams. But then the Lord breaks through with a dream. And none of those unclean spirits, none of those demonic entities have any idea what the Lord is doing. But Joseph is going to know, right? Joseph knows. How can Joseph know? Because he's connected to the mind of the Lord. He's connected to the Lord. And we look at the New Testament version of that for us. And we read there in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 16, where Paul asked the question, who has known the mind of the Lord that he may instruct him? And then Paul says this, but we have the mind of Christ. And so if you're a believer, if you're connected to Christ, you are directly connected to the mind of the Father through the Son. I hope you're taking advantage of that. I hope you're making use of that. That is access that has been granted to you by God as you have come to Him through Jesus Christ. And that's the kind of thing, an Old Testament version for sure, but that's the kind of thing that Joseph has with the Lord. He's connected. Verse 17, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I stood on the bank of the river. Suddenly, so we're going to go through this all again, right? So we can move a little faster this time. He says, suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt. I like this. Such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. No one wants ugly cows. You know, it's tough enough to look a cow in the eye, then slaughter and then eat it. But, you know, if it looks like it's got mad cow disease, no one wants that. No one's going to eat that. Verse 20, and the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I woke up. Now that's an important detail. That's a new bit of information that we didn't get the first time through. Pharaoh, as he's telling Joseph this dream, he says, now when those 7 skinny cows ate those 7 fat cows, the 7 skinny cows didn't get any bigger whatsoever. They didn't look any healthier. It's still, you know, ribs poking through meat and, skin and bone. So they don't grow. That's important because that's part of the interpretation. So hold on to that. Verse 22, also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. Then behold, 7 heads, withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. No one had a thought on the matter. Verse 25, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Now remember the butler and the baker's dreams. They had dreams both on the same night, but they were of very different interpretations, weren't they? One was for edification. One was for restoration to his position, but the other dream was for the purpose of condemnation. However, Pharaoh has 2 dreams, both in one night, but Joseph says they both have the same meaning. I just find that interesting, and I point it out because This is exactly how it happened to Joseph. He also had 2 dreams, if you remember, and they meant the same thing. So Joseph is a man speaking from experience here. Verse 26, the 7 good cows are 7 years. He's given the interpretation here. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are 1, and the 7 thin and ugly cows, which came up after them, are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will deplete the land. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following. So now you know why there was that part of the dream where the skinny cows ate the fat cows and didn't get any bigger. That's the meaning of the dream. The 7 years of famine are going to completely take away from the 7 years of plenty. You're going to forget all about the plenty. You're going to forget all about the prosperity because those 7 years of famine are going to be so bad. They're going to eat up all of the prosperity of that previous 7 years, but it's not going to help a bit in those 7 years of famine. Now, that's unless someone comes up with a plan. He goes on to say, for it will be very severe. Verse 32, and the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. In other words, God wanted to make sure that you got the point. So he gave you the dream twice in 2 different ways so that you couldn't get it confused. Here's the dream. There will be 7 years of wonderful, unparalleled plenty, followed by 7 years of unparalleled famine or trouble or tribulation in the land of Egypt. Did you catch the key word that begins to set us off into our study of typology? Now, how long will the tribulation period be that is coming upon the face of the earth? 7 years. 7 years. And if you take a look closely at Scripture, you'll see the same pattern follows. When we are launched on this earth into the time of the Great Tribulation period, does it follow 7 years of difficulty? Does it follow 7 years of famine, if you will? It doesn't. If you follow this, track this through the Scriptures, you'll find out the pattern holds true. There's 7 years of plenty in the land of Egypt, followed by these 7 very difficult years of trouble. And the Scriptures tell us the same thing concerning the tribulation period. Paul says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3, when they say peace and safety, hey, everything is great. We're prosperous. Things are going well. When they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. You see what that's doing? That's announcing the tribulation period. It comes upon them as sudden destruction, but it doesn't just happen all at once, does it? It's 7 years of destruction. But here's the point. That destruction happens on this world scene in the same way that labor pains happen with a woman. And when you get that first labor pain, and we're not talking Braxton Hicks here. When you get that first labor pain, that first pain where you're officially in labor, guess what? There's no stopping it. Well, without medical intervention. There's no stopping it. That travail has come upon that woman, and she's in that period of travail until that child is born. And that's what Paul tells us is going to happen as far as the tribulation period goes. But it's going to come on the heels of great prosperity. People are going to be looking around. Hey, not a problem in the world. It's going to be as it was in the days of Noah, people eating and drinking and partying, living life. Things are good. There's wine, there's booze, there's food. We're prosperous. Peace and safety. That means, for me, the setup for the Great Tribulation could be any time. The rapture could happen right now. Did you know I believe that? The rapture could happen right now, followed immediately by the 7 years of tribulation. Maybe you've heard me say that a time or two over the last 3 or 4 Sunday services. I believe that could happen right now because if you look very realistically at the economy globally, we're on a real high, folks. I mean, we keep topping the previous years. I know there's dips, but when you look globally at the prosperity that's on this land, it's unparalleled. We've never had it this good. I mean, you go to places that used to be just villages, and now they've got like McDonald's, and they've got the internet, and they're posting memes and videos from YouTube, or videos onto YouTube from their iPhones. I mean, we are prosperous like never before. I know there are pockets of poverty. There's always going to be that. But man, we're in a period of real prosperity. People are comfortable. People are saying peace. Well, maybe not peace. But they're happy, they're content with stuff, with prosperity. And it's then that just like travail, the rapture takes place and the tribulation begins. Now, maybe you're thinking, all right, Arlyn, if this is a type, if you're telling me this is a typological study that is linking us to the Great Tribulation period, I have a problem because Joseph is going to be going through this time of famine, tribulation. And so is his dad, Jacob, and his family. They're all going to be experiencing this time of trouble. Doesn't that break the type? No, it doesn't break the type. Because who is Jacob in the type? What's Jacob's name? What was his name changed to? Israel. Now this type holds perfect. We're not talking about the church in Genesis 41 as we see this type of the tribulation period being set up here in the text. We're talking about Israel's part in the Great Tribulation period. That's what we're seeing in a type here. It's true the church will not be going through the tribulation period, but the nation of Israel is going to go through the tribulation period. Now, we're going to close here. This gets real deep. Just about every word we're about to dive into in this study is going to have some kind of connection to a typology. But I want to leave you with this tonight. I planned on getting this completely done, so I've got to find a good breaking point. Here's where I'm going to leave you. I'm going to leave you with this. How's this for a type? In our study of the life of Joseph, who is Joseph a type of in the New Testament? He is a type of Christ, right? So when you're looking at Joseph in this story, you're going to be connecting his movements and the things that he does and the things that he says and the things that are said about him. You're going to be connecting them to New Testament things that connect us to something from the life of Christ. Now, who is Jacob in the story? Who is he symbolizing? The nation of Israel. Now, what is going to happen? You have to know a little bit ahead in the story. We're cheating, but that's okay because we're going to come back and cover it all in full. We're cheating for a moment. But what's going to happen in this story when this gets underway and they are in that 7 year of famine? What's going to happen? Jacob, who symbolizes the nation of Israel, is going to come to who for deliverance? Joseph, who is a type of Christ. And we're going to connect that to the New Testament, and we're going to see how the scriptures teach us that's it. That is the period of time the nation of Israel, by and large, did miss their Messiah when he came the first time, but during the tribulation, which the scriptures refer to also as the time of Jacob's trouble. During the time of Jacob's trouble, Jacob is going to come to Joseph. And Joseph is going to be the deliverer. It gets even more interesting. Because when the boys come to, when the Jewish brothers, when they come to Joseph that first time, they don't recognize him. They don't know who he is. But it's when they come the second time that they finally get to understand. They finally get the revelation of who he is. He's Joseph, their brother and their deliverer. Same with the Jews. The first time, at the first coming of Jesus, the Jews stumbled over him. He was a stumbling block to the Jews by and large. And it will be at just before the second coming of Christ, during that tribulation period, that the blinders will fall off, just like they did for Joseph's brothers, that the blinders will fall off and the nation of Israel will come to Christ. And what does the scripture say concerning the nation of Israel? Has God cast away his people then? God forbid. Absolutely not. And the scriptures say all of Israel shall be saved. And if you want to understand that real well, study Romans chapter 9 through 11. That is Paul reminding us the promise of God to the nation of Israel. I'll leave you with those thoughts tonight. We're gonna dig into these typological connections next Wednesday night, and I think you're going to be really surprised at how deep this runs. I mean, we won't even be able to cover it all. I'll point you in the direction. I'll throw scriptures at you. You're going to have to think fast, and I'm going to have to talk fast. It may be a disaster, but we're going to do it. So come back next week as we really get into this. Let's stand and we'll close in a word of prayer.